Hey, what's going on, everybody? Writing the Constitution in 1787 was only half the war. The real cage match came after the delegates left Philadelphia, convincing 13 stubborn states to actually accept it. Here's the thing. The Constitution wasn't automatic. It wasn't like sign here, boom, government. Nope. It needed 9 of the 13 states to ratify it before it became law, which meant every state had to hold its own convention, drag the thing through fiery debates, political speeches, tavern arguments, the kind where somebody probably threw a tankard across the room, politics is a heated debate. But writing the Constitution was the easy part. The ratification was like dropping 13 drunks into a tavern and telling them to agree on one song for the fiddle player. Welcome to the ratification battles, and welcome to our republic.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band,
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not one small step for man.
Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
We pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
So right out of the gate, Americans split in two camps, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Team Federalists was, let's actually have a country. They argued the Constitution gave it enough power to keep the Union alive without sliding into tyranny. Big names like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and James Mason and John Jay led the charge. And then the Anti-Federalists. This is the team, it smells like a monarchy, part 2. But they were like, they actually didn't trust the document. They worried it handed way too much authority to the central government and hated that it didn't include the Bill of Rights. Patrick Henry practically thundered the words, "I smell a rat," across Virginia. George Mason and Samuel Adams weren't far behind. The core question they hammered, where's the Bill of Rights? How do you expect one government to speak for everyone from Maine to Georgia? And what's to stop the president from becoming an elected king, right? So let's cue in the greatest political PR campaign in American history, the Federalist Papers. Hamilton, Madison, Jay, they all teamed up to explain why the Constitution wasn't secretly a trap. Over 2 years, they cranked out 85 essays in the New York newspapers. Hamilton went into machine mode. He wrote 51 articles. Madison, he was pretty solid. He wrote 29. And Jay, he probably did what I would do. He wrote 5. Respectable, but illness also sidelined him. So these articles tackled everything from why a strong union mattered to how checks and balances would keep liberty safe. They weren't just pamphlets. They were political artillery aimed straight at the Anti-Federalists' arguments. To this day, law students, judges, politicians still quote them like gospel when interpreting the Constitution. And then there was the state-by-state battles, right? So let's talk about this ratification roller coaster that took place. Delaware, December 7th, 1787, they were the first to ratify unanimously, quick and done. Small state, wanted protection, saw the Constitution as their ticket, right? Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, and Connecticut, they all jumped on board within weeks, and by January 1788, the Constitution had momentum. Massachusetts was the turning point. The Anti-Federalists, led by Sam Adams and John Hancock, weren't having it. The only way it passed, the Federalists promised to add the Bill of Rights. And that compromise swung enough votes, and Massachusetts ratified in February. Huge win. Then you got Maryland and South Carolina, both ratified next, adding fuel to the fire, right? Now the Constitution was up to 8 states. One more, and it was technically law. New Hampshire, June 21st, 1788, state number 9. Constitution approved, done deal, right? No, wrong. Without New York and Virginia, the two heavyweights, the new union would be like wobbling on a 3-legged chair, right? It just wouldn't be solidified. But then Virginia, on June 25th, 1788, Patrick Henry basically lit the room on fire with his speech against the Constitution. George Mason backed him up, but Madison, John Marshall, and Edmund Randolph, that's tongue twister for me for some reason, countered, look, we'll add the Bill of Rights. And that promise sealed it. Virginia ratified, but barely. And then New York on July 26, 1788, another nail-biter. The vote squeaked by 30-27, only because the Federalists promised again to push for the Bill of Rights. Hamilton's essays had worked their magic, right? North Carolina flat out refused until they saw the Bill of Rights in progress, ratified in November of 1789. And then there's Rhode Island. Classic Rhode Island. They did their classic Rhode Island move. They flipped the table and refused to sign until May of 1790, by which time Washington had already been president and the new government had been running for over a year. So let's talk about the Bill of Rights, right? The Constitution technically made it through, but the ratification battles proved one thing loud and clear. People wanted guarantees. Federalists had promised to add protections that they delivered, right? In 1789, Madison drafted amendments to safeguard core freedoms. By 1791, the first 10, the Bill of Rights, were ratified. Freedom from speech, freedom from religion, right to assemble, due process, protections from government abuse. This wasn't a concession of weakness. It was a sign of strength. The Constitution could adapt. It could listen. It could evolve without breaking. And that was huge, right? So the ratification battles were loud, messy, and pure America. The Constitution wasn't forced on the people. It dragged through enough tavern, newspaper, and state houses until folks said, fine, we'll give it a shot. And out of that chaos came not only the Constitution itself, but also the Bill of Rights, which is the cornerstone of American liberty. I know this episode was a little short, and a couple of the others following behind it are going to be just as short because we got a lot of information to get through in the next coming weeks. I really appreciate you listening, and always remember, history isn't boring, especially when the future of the United States came down to 13 states arguing like a family reunion with way too much whiskey, and somehow, against all odds, creating the most successful political experiment in the history of the world. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.